They first spoke his name in a whisper. German officers, writing hurried reports from the hard edges of North Africa, marked a single word in the margins, Alan. It appeared without explanation, as if context itself was unnecessary. For men accustomed to measuring threats in divisions and armored columns, it was unusual to fear a name. Yet they wrote it anyway, quietly acknowledging a presence they could not yet define. One such whisper survived the desert, carried in a captured diary taken from a wounded signals officer near Sidi Bou Zid. The entry, smudged by dust, and the trembling hand that wrote it, described Alan as a ghost who appears where the fire is hottest. The phrasing was uncharacteristically poetic for a man trained in method and discipline, but the desert had a way of stripping formality from language. In the crucible of heat and attrition, soldiers reached for any vocabulary that explained what they could not predict. His division, the U.S. 1st Infantry, was young compared to the hardened formations of the Wehrmacht. Many of its men had never seen combat, and fewer still had crossed an ocean with the expectation of defeating a seasoned enemy. Yet under Alan they moved with a speed that German commanders had not anticipated. Reports noted their unnatural resilience, as if endurance itself were a weapon. They advanced not with elegance, but with an unmistakable sense of direction, as though compelled by the man who led them. Outside Iran, the wreckage of their passage still smoldered. A line of British-built Bren carriers lay overturned beside the road, twisted by artillery and fire. The air shimmered with heat when Alan stepped through the smoke, his silhouette filling the broken frame of a burned-out vehicle. To the men watching him, he seemed almost carved from the desert, unflinching, deliberate, and unwilling to grant the landscape the satisfaction of slowing him down. There was no theatrics in his movement, only certainty. Then the view broadens. North Africa, 1942, a battleground shaped not only by strategy but by pride, miscalculation, and the cumulative weight of humiliation. The Allies had arrived with optimism. The desert corrected it. Here, distances consumed fuel, sand wore down machinery, and the enemy moved with the confidence of experience. It was a theater that demanded humility from every soldier who entered it. The United States Army, still untested on the world stage, struggled to find its footing across these vast expanses. Equipment failed, doctrines faltered, and expectations collided with reality. Yet Alan carried a different timeline in his mind. He believed that transformation need not take years. He intended to compress it into weeks, bridging the gap between naive ambition and hardened skill through relentless training and uncompromising discipline. What the Americans had not yet realized was something their enemy sensed far earlier. Alan's methods unsettled those who studied them. German analysts could not articulate why, but they recognized a pattern forming, a slow tilt in momentum, a shift in confidence, a commander who refused to behave according to their predictions. And while his own superiors were still debating the limits of his approach, the Germans had already drawn their conclusion. They feared him first. The Americans would understand why soon enough. America stepped into 1942 with resolve, but not with refinement. Its factories thundered with new purpose, its cities glowed beneath recruitment posters, and its young men crossed oceans believing that courage alone could replace experience. Yet on the battlefields ahead, they would meet opponents shaped by years of conflict, armies that had already learned, at terrible cost, the difference between enthusiasm and skill. The United States possessed strength in abundance, but battlefield craft was still a language it had not mastered. When Alan looked upon the soldiers entrusted to him, he saw this truth plainly. Their uniforms were crisp, their movements earnest, their intentions sincere. But beneath that first impression lay a harder reality. They lacked the instincts forged by contact with a seasoned enemy. What he noticed instead was their raw aggression and the unstructured initiative that emerged from a democratic culture, qualities that, if refined, could produce a force capable of unnerving even the Wehrmacht. His task, as he understood it, was not to break these tendencies, but to channel them. This conviction led him to reject many of the traditions that defined military training in the interwar years. Parade ground symmetry, polished boots, and ceremonial correctness held little interest for him. He replaced them with long marches over broken ground, with live-fire drills that mimicked confusion rather than order, with exercises designed to frustrate rather than reassure. To Alan, the battlefield was not a parade, but a collision of uncertainty and violence. If his soldiers were to survive it, I needed preparation rooted in reality, not ritual. His officers, many of whom had built their careers on the structure and etiquette of peacetime service, resisted him with increasing frustration. They wrote formal objections, citing doctrine and tradition. Some confronted him directly, insisting, "This is not how a division is commanded." The challenge was not disrespect. It was confusion. Allen's methods dismantled the hierarchy of comfort that peacetime had constructed, leaving many unsure of their place within his rising tempo. His answer cut through the debate with the simplicity of a man uninterested in persuasion. "It is how a division survives," he replied. There was no warmth in the statement, no attempt to soften its implication. For Allen, the conversation ended there. The war would decide whether he was right. What surprised many observers was how the soldiers themselves responded. They did not admire him, nor did they require inspiration from his personality. They followed him because his clarity matched the stakes of the world they were entering. He promised them nothing except the chance to live through battles that would test every assumption they carried. In an army still finding its identity, that promise carried unusual weight. The irony was that those who understood him earliest were not his countrymen but his adversaries. German analysts watching the shifts in American training recognized the pattern before Allied command did. They sensed a leader transforming inexperience into threat, shaping a division faster than their models predicted. What Allen's own superiors dismissed as unorthodox, the enemy interpreted as warning, one they would soon confront directly. The 1st Infantry Division met its first true test not against the Wehrmacht, but against the Vichy French during Operation Torch. It was an encounter born of political ambiguity and geographic necessity, an American army advancing into North Africa against soldiers who, only months earlier, might have been allies. For Allen, the uncertainty surrounding the defenders did not soften the task before him. He understood that the division's first steps into combat would leave an impression deeper than any speech or slogan. War would define them from this moment forward. His instinct was immediate and unwavering. Move fast, strike hard, and deny the enemy the time to understand what was happening. He believed confusion could be as potent as firepower. Speed, in his view, was not merely a tactic but a form of psychological pressure. As his units pushed toward Oran, the desert seemed to stretch and contract around them, harsh, silent, indifferent. Yet within that vastness, Allen exploited every minute, driving his troops forward before hesitation could take root. What followed surprised even those who had doubted his methods. The breach of Oran came faster than predicted, its defenders overwhelmed by the sheer velocity of the American advance. The reports that filtered back through Allied channels carried a tone of cautious admiration. Here was a division that had never faced real combat, yet it fought as if determined to make up for lost time. For the first time, Allen's name appeared in favorable assessments rather than whispered concerns. The battlefield had validated his instincts. But Allen himself was not satisfied. Victory, in his view, was only valuable if it revealed the truth beneath its surface. And the truth he saw was troubling. His troops were brave but scattered, their cohesion fragile when confronted with unexpected resistance. Tactical discipline wavered. Fire discipline broke entirely in the heat of confusion. They had moved quickly, but often without the synchrony that hardened units took for granted. Allen understood that success in Iran had concealed flaws that, against a stronger opponent, would become fatal. So he began reshaping the division in the winds of the North African desert. Training no longer resembled preparation. It became a crucible. He pushed his soldiers harder than before, introducing scenarios designed to exhaust them, then forcing them to think clearly despite their exhaustion. His corrections were sharp, his expectations unyielding. Each decision carried a single purpose: to build a division capable not only of advancing, but of enduring the counterblows that would follow. The harshness of his approach became personal. He addressed mistakes directly, sometimes painfully, knowing that battle would offer no gentler instruction. Men who once questioned him found themselves confronting the possibility that his severity was a form of protection, not punishment. Under Allen, weakness was not condemned. It was erased through repetition, discipline, and clarity. As the Atlas Mountains cast their long shadows across the training grounds, something began to shift. A division that had entered North Africa uncertain and untested started to move with intent, its edges sharpening, its identity forming under press. This was no longer the inexperienced force the enemy had expected. And in those first hardened weeks, the outline of a general emerged, one Germany would learn to fear long before it understood his name. Allen's distrust of distant authority grew with every mile the division advanced into North Africa. Headquarters doctrine, shaped by years of theoretical study, spoken abstractions, lines on maps, arrows of intent, reports polished until the violence beneath them was unrecognizable. But Allen trusted something simpler and far more immediate, the instincts of men who lived close to danger. He believed a division learned more from a single night under fire than from any classroom. And so he shaped his command, not in the image of the manuals he had memorized as a young officer, but in the tempo and texture of the desert itself. He ate with enlisted men, not for effect but for understanding. At makeshift tables in wind-carved bivouacs, he listened to corporals describe the terrain as they felt it, the weight of sand under their boots, the way sound traveled across the ridgelines, the subtle cues that signaled an enemy patrol long before it could be seen. These conversations, quiet and unadorned, provided him with knowledge no staff study could match. It was from them that he learned where frustration lived, where fear emerged, and where resilience took root. To Allen, this proximity was not a breach of rank but a practical necessity. In the evenings, he ordered drills that confounded his officers. Night attacks, conducted with minimal guidance, forced the men to navigate uncertainty with their own initiative. He believed the darkness taught lessons daylight concealed: coordination without visibility, leadership without ceremony, movement guided by instinct rather than command. The desert, lit only by the smallest glint of moonlight, became his classroom. If the men were to face an enemy skilled in rapid maneuvers, they had to learn to create momentum in conditions designed to break it. Underlying all his choices was a conviction he rarely voiced. War rewarded aggression, not ceremony. Precision had its place, but hesitation was fatal. He had watched armies collapse not because they were untrained, but because they waited too long to impose their will. Allen wanted a division unafraid to seize initiative, one capable of acting before the enemy completed his thought. In every drill, every correction, every long march across shifting dunes, he sought to instill this instinct. Older staff officers viewed his approach with barely concealed discomfort. To them, Allen's disregard for formality threatened the dignity of command. They believed structure preserved order, and that order preserved victory. His casual meals with privates, his direct critique of junior officers, and his willingness to replace routine with improvisation struck them as reckless. Some whispered that he was eroding the chain of command. Others feared he was cultivating unpredictability in a force that needed stability. Their concerns grew as reports of his unorthodox sessions reached headquarters. But the younger soldiers saw something else. They saw a commander who noticed them, not their ranks, not their reputations, but their reality. Allen was the first senior officer many had met who studied their reactions during drills, who asked where they felt exposed during an attack, who showed them through action rather than speech that survival depended on understanding the battlefield as intimately as he did. They followed him not because he inspired affection, but because he treated their experiences as essential truths. Training intensified as German reconnaissance units grew bolder along the Tunisian frontier. Enemy patrols probed deeper each week, testing Allied lines, mapping weaknesses, and reporting every sign of American inexperience. Allen recognized the pattern. The Wehrmacht was preparing for a larger clash, one in which hesitation would be punished without mercy. He accelerated the division's preparation, adding new layers of complexity to each drill. Coordination between infantry and armor became faster. Communication lines tightened. Response time shortened until movement itself resembled instinct. During this period, a belief crystallized in him with the force of revelation. Maneuver speed was America's untapped weapon. It was not the elegance of European doctrine nor the crushing bluntness of Soviet mass. It was something uniquely American, a blend of mechanical capacity, initiative, and restless energy. If harnessed correctly, it could unbalance even a confident enemy. Allen became convinced that victory in North Africa would belong not to the strongest force, but to the fastest mind. And as he forged this doctrine beneath the desert sun, he sensed that the real test, the one Germany had already begun preparing for, was drawing steadily nearer. The Germans approached the Americans in late 1942 with a mixture of disdain and caution. Hay dismissed U.S. fire discipline as undisciplined and wasteful, a flaw that appeared again and again in their early reports. But beneath those criticisms lay a quieter admission, one that revealed their true concern. They feared the speed with which American units repositioned themselves. To veteran German officers, accustomed to opponents who defended methodically, the sudden mobility of Allen's division appeared irregular, almost impulsive, yet undeniably dangerous. It was a rhythm they had not anticipated. Field Marshal Hans-Eugen von Arnim, newly appointed commander of the German forces in Tunisia, was among the first to recognize the shift. Studying the tempo of American attacks along the Auselsche Valley, he noted that they arrived not as steady sequences of advance and consolidation, but as abrupt accelerations, punctuated by flanking movements that forced his units to reorient faster than their doctrine comfortably allowed. In one report, he wrote of the violent tempo of Allen's engagements, an unusual phrase from a commander known for measured language. To von Arnim, the danger was not that the Americans were refined, but that they were unpredictable. German prisoners taken in skirmishes along the Tunisian frontier confirmed these impressions. Many recalled encounters in which the 1st Infantry Division appeared on their flanks before they had even completed their initial defenses. Patrol leaders described hearing the clatter of American armor in unexpected places, sometimes minutes after contact had been made elsewhere. Others recalled infantry units emerging from terrain they had assumed impassable. To them, the Americans did not fight like a conventional force. They fought like a presence that expanded and contracted with unnerving speed. Allen read these captured reports with quiet satisfaction. He did not display triumph, nor did he gloat over enemy confusion. Instead, the documents confirmed something he had sensed intuitively during his earliest days in North Africa, that the division's greatest strength lay not in its firepower, but in its ability to impose disorientation. Mobility could fracture the enemy's sense of control. It could force even seasoned units into reactive decisions. And in war, he believed, once the enemy's mind became unsettled, his defenses, no matter how strong, would begin to unravel. This belief grew into a doctrine he articulated only to his closest officers. "We can break the Germans mentally, not just physically," he said during one evening briefing. The statement was delivered without the tone of prophecy, simply as a conclusion drawn from observation. Allen understood that the Germans relied heavily on tempo and synchronization. If the Americans shattered those rhythms, victory would follow not from brute strength but from psychological disruption. It was a theory built not on abstract strategy, but on the lived experiences of men who had already felt the enemy's reaction time falter. To pursue this idea, Allen prepared the division for a style of warfare that headquarters did not yet endorse. Official doctrine emphasized deliberate movement, coordinated advances, and predictable pacing. Allen's drills embraced none of these. He trained his troops to shift direction without awaiting full orders, to exploit partial information, and to treat every hesitation as an opportunity. Logistics teams were pushed to refine their resupply timing. Reconnaissance units were ordered to operate deeper into contested ground, mapping routes that might offer sudden avenues of attack. It was a framework of controlled aggression, practical, dynamic, and entirely his own. But in these early successes, the seeds of friction began to grow. Allen's confidence, sharpened by battlefield validation, placed him increasingly at odds with a bureaucracy still bound to peacetime expectations. His division was learning to fight in a manner that exceeded the comfort of those who oversaw it from afar. The gap between doctrine and reality widened with every drill, every report, every captured document that confirmed the Germans were adapting too slowly. What Allen could not yet know was how swiftly that gap would turn into conflict, one that would test not only his methods, but the patience of those determined to restrain them. February 1943 arrived with a silence that felt deceptive. The winter winds sweeping across the Tunisian hills carried neither comfort nor warning, only the subtle tension of an enemy preparing to strike. For the U.S. Army, still young in its war against Germany, this would be the month when confidence met consequence. Kasserine Pass, an unremarkable fold in the Atlas Mountains, would become the place where American ambition collided with the hardened precision of the Afrika Korps. It was here that the nation faced its first great disaster. The attack opened with German clarity. Panzer divisions under General Rommel moved through the pass with a coordination that seemed almost mecha. Nickel artillery softened the forward lines, armor exploited the gaps, infantry advanced with a speed born from years of fighting along 3 continents. Against this force, the American defenses buckled. Units unfamiliar with the violence of a concentrated assault found themselves overwhelmed. Kasserine Pass, wide enough to invite movement yet narrow enough to trap those who faltered, collapsed under the pressure. The lines that had held the previous evening no longer existed by morning. Allen's sector, positioned along the northern approaches, resisted longer than most. His men fought with the aggression he had instilled in them, counterattacking when others pulled back, repositioning even as the ground dissolved beneath them. Yet even this determination had limits. The Germans brought combined arms tactics refined through years of war, tanks pressing forward in wedge formations, Stuka dive bombers scarring the sky with descending sirens, infantry weaving through the chaos with practiced coordination. Under such weight, Allen's position cracked, not from lack of courage but from a mismatch of experience. He saw U.S. units retreat past his command post, their formations broken, their officers struggling to regain order. Vehicles moved without direction, some veering into ditches, others circling back in confusion. The shock on the soldiers' faces revealed more than fear, it revealed disbelief. They had not imagined the enemy could strike with such precision. They had heard of German efficiency, but hearing was different from witnessing it tear through their lines with mathematical certainty. In those moments, Allen understood the true nature of inexperience, not ignorance, but the absence of memory. His fury remained controlled. He did not shout, did not condemn the men pouring back through the narrowing pass. Instead, he absorbed the scene with the restrained focus of a man realizing a lesson he had predicted but hoped to avoid. Kasserine Pass was not a failure of will, it was a failure of preparation. The Americans had underestimated the discipline required to stand against a coordinated German assault. Allen felt the recognition settle heavily within him. It tightened something in his expression, sharpened his resolve, and erased any lingering belief that the army could learn its craft gently. Arrogance died in that pass. The optimism that had carried many units into North Africa evaporated beneath the weight of defeat. In its place grew something sturdier, discipline. Men who survived Kasserine understood the price of hesitation. Officers who once relied on doctrine alone now grasped the urgency of adaptation. And Allen, who had long preached the necessity of aggressive precision, saw his arguments confirmed by the landscape itself. The desert had delivered its verdict with brutal clarity. In the days that followed, as the army regrouped and command structures rebuilt themselves, Allen set about reshaping his division with renewed intensity. He replaced assumptions with drills, replaced confidence with competence, replaced routine with readiness. Every exercise now carried the imprint of Kasserine, a reminder that the enemy would not forgive a second lapse. And as reports whispered that the Germans were preparing their next offensive, Allen's preparations took on a sharper edge. The division he was forging in the shadow of defeat was no longer the same force that had entered the pass. He was hardening them for the rematch he knew was coming. Allen did not wait for permission to rebuild his division. In the days after Kasserine, when the shock of defeat still hung in the air like dust unsettled by artillery, he issued orders that stunned even his veteran officers. The retraining would begin immediately, and it would not resemble anything they had known before. He demanded conditions that mirrored combat as closely as possible, terrain that punished hesitation, ammunition that carried real consequence, and scenarios designed to force men into decisions rather than obedience. To Allen, the only way to erase the memory of Kasserine was to burn through it. Live-fire drills became the core of his new regime. Machine gun nests were positioned exactly as German units favored them, with fields of fire calculated down to the meter. Mortar teams practiced staggered barrages matching enemy timing. Armored units rehearsed the angular advances preferred by the Afrika Korps, learning to anticipate not only movement but intent. Some officers questioned the risks. Allen acknowledged them calmly, then ordered the exercises to continue. Precision, he insisted, must be learned at full cost, not simulated through blanks and safety margins. Only by confronting the enemy's methods with mathematical clarity could the division learn to dismantle them. Night marches followed, stretching for miles through broken country. They served not only to harden the men but to reveal leadership where it lived, quietly, often unexpectedly, those who did not carry high rank. Junior officers struggled to interpret the terrain with limited visibility, while non-commissioned officers stepped forward to steady the line, redirect movements, and restore cohesion in the darkness. The marches acted as a filter, revealing who could guide men when the world narrowed to shadows and instinct. Promotion boards soon reflected these discoveries. NCOs rose swiftly, and commanders learned that rank alone could not guarantee authority. Gradually, the division began to adopt a new identity. The phrase emerged organically, passed from platoon to platoon. The big red one does not break. It was not a boast, but a statement of intent, a recognition that their earlier failure demanded not excuses but transformation. The words settled into their routines, whispered during difficult marches, murmured at the onset of night attacks, repeated after drills that left them exhausted yet sharper than before. Identity, Allen believed, was as important as strategy. If men carried a truth into battle, it could anchor them when the fight turned chaotic. Central to this transformation was the initiative Allen demanded at the squad level. He had long admired how German units empowered their junior leaders, allowing frontline decisions to shape the rhythm of the battle. American doctrine, more centralized and cautious, often stifled this potential. Allen challenged it directly. He taught his sergeants to exploit openings the moment they appeared, to shift positions without awaiting full orders, to treat battlefield awareness as a shared responsibility rather than a command luxury. Allen spent the weeks after Kasserine studying the Germans with the patience of a craftsman examining a difficult material. He gathered captured battalion logs, artillery tables, and records of armored thrusts dating back to the desert fighting in Libya. Spread across his field desk beneath a dim lantern, the documents formed a mosaic of enemy behavior, cycles of fire, preferred avenues of approach, timings between reconnaissance probes and full assaults. Where others saw data, Allen sought rhythm. He believed every army carried a signature in its movements, and that if he understood the cadence of the Afrika Korps, he could force them into mistakes they did not yet imagine. Gradually, pattern gave way to prediction. Allen developed an instinct for enemy movement that bordered on art, a blend of calculation, observation, and intuition forged through weeks of watching German decisions unfold across the same unforgiving terrain. He learned to recognize the subtle indicators preceding an armored push: a shift in distant engine noise, a temporary lull in artillery, the sudden retreat of enemy patrols from forward ridges. His staff grew accustomed to the quiet moment when Allen stood from his map table, eyes fixed on the horizon, already sensing the shape of a maneuver that had not yet revealed itself. Reconnaissance units soon reported on his uncanny timing with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. More than once, he ordered rapid redeployments only minutes before German attacks commenced, movements that placed American positions directly in the path of enemy thrusts. Patrol commanders returning from the high ground spoke of the strange alignment between Allen's decisions and German intentions, as though he were reading from an unseen script. To them, it felt less like guessing and more like an emerging skill, a commander learning to hear the pulse of his opponent. To complement this awareness, Allen expanded the use of deception across his forward lines. His engineers, already seasoned by months of improvisation in the desert, became architects of illusion. They constructed false gun pits with spent shell casings arranged to mimic active positions. Camouflaged trenches were angled to lure enemy artillery, while real emplacements lay hidden behind slopes the Germans considered too minor to conceal anything of value. Even abandoned vehicles were positioned deliberately, their tracks shaped to suggest movements never taken. The goal was not merely to mislead the enemy, but to shape their decisions, bending their actions in directions Allen could exploit. Silent maneuver soon became a defining skill of the division. The men practiced night movements without headlights, navigating by starlight, compass, and memory. Engines were throttled low, trucks rolled in neutral down inclines, infantry moved as shadows across the sand. These rehearsals stripped noise from the battlefield and replaced it with intent. When the time came to reposition entire companies beneath the cover of darkness, they did so with a fluidity that startled even experienced observers. Silence, Allen believed, was a weapon, and one the Germans often failed to anticipate. It was during this period that German officers began noting a troubling trend in their reports. "He adapts faster than American doctrine allows," one commander wrote after analyzing a failed probe against the 1st Division's positions near Algetar. The Americans, they observed, no longer reacted with predictable scripts. Their counterattacks came earlier, their feints grew more convincing, and their defensive lines shifted with unnerving agility. The Germans recognized that Allen was reshaping his division in ways that defied their assumptions, pushing flexibility down to the lowest ranks while maintaining a tempo that tested even seasoned units. For Allen, adaptation was not an abstract virtue but a practical necessity. He understood that the desert rewarded those who moved first, not those who moved perfectly. Every battlefield contained chaos, unexpected terrain, broken communication, fleeting opportunities. Where some saw disruption, Allen saw a field of potential. "Chaos," he once remarked to his staff, "is simply the part of the battle the enemy has not claimed yet." He drilled his officers to exploit confusion, not fear it. If a German flank advanced unevenly, he struck the gap. If an artillery cycle shifted early, he ordered a forward rush while the enemy recalibrated. In every engagement, he sought the moment when uncertainty made the battlefield malleable. This philosophy transformed the division's thinking. Platoon leaders learned to treat ambiguity as information. Company commanders practiced shifting plans mid-assault. Engineers prepared multiple fallback routes not for retreat, but for redirection. What emerged was a force that could turn enemy initiative against itself, catching thrusts at odd angles, counterattacking before German officers completed their orders, and using terrain to disrupt the rhythm the enemy depended upon. Allen had begun to convert battlefield chaos into calculated opportunity. And as his division internalized this new doctrine, the Germans sensed a change they could not easily quantify. Their opponent was no longer reacting to them. He was learning to think with them, and sometimes ahead of them. Longstop Hill rose from the Tunisian landscape with an authority that seemed almost deliberate, as if the terrain itself intended to test every army that approached it. For Allen, it became the crucible he had long anticipated, a place where training, instinct, and hard-won discipline would converge under the uncompromising scrutiny of battle. Capturing Longstop meant opening the road to Tunis. Losing it meant accepting that the lessons of Kasserine had not yet taken root. The hill, jagged and steep, offered no neutrality. It demanded proof. The Germans held the heights with perfect understanding of their advantage. Their artillery, positioned with near-mathematical precision, raked the approaches with fire that seemed to fall exactly where an ascending soldier would take cover. Each ravine, each fold in the earth became a trap governed by geometry and experience. Observers later recalled that the shelling was not merely destructive, it was predictive. The Afrika Korps had memorized the contours of the hill, and every American step upward triggered a response calculated to halt momentum before it could gather strength. Allen answered this with a coordination the U.S. Army had only recently begun to master. Infantry moved first, probing the lower slopes with deliberate aggression. Tanks followed along the narrow approaches, their turrets angled toward threat rather than formation. Above them, American aircraft carved brief windows of relief, suppressing the German positions long enough for ground forces to advance. What emerged was a flexibility uncommon in early U.S. operations. Armor and infantry shifting roles mid-assault, artillery adjusting fire in seconds rather than minutes, air support woven seamlessly into the rising fight. Allen watched this evolution with a calm intensity, knowing the division was beginning to operate in the rhythm he had spent months forging. The men who scaled the ravines under fire discovered the true cost of initiative. The steep gullies that offered concealment also trapped blast waves, fragments ricocheted unpredictably, machine gun lines of sight appeared without warning. Every advance demanded a decision made in seconds, whether to push forward, shift laterally, or withdraw before artillery corrected its aim. In those moments, the training Allen had insisted upon revealed its purpose. Squads moved with self-reliance. Junior leaders made critical calls without awaiting distant orders. The climb became not just an assault on a hill, but a test of a doctrine built from hardship. The Germans counterattacked with the ferocity expected of units defending high ground. Their first attempt drove down the slope with disciplined aggression, seeking to break the American foothold before it expanded. Allen's infantry bent but did not fracture. Artillery shifted rapidly to blunt the assault. Armor repositioned to intercept the enemy's lowest descent. When the counterattack stalled, the hill trembled under renewed shelling, a barrage de zig. Ned not to destroy but to demoralize, yet the line held. A second German counterattack followed hours later, this one sharper, more coordinated and supported by mortars hidden along the ridgeline. It struck the center of Allen's advance, targeting what the Germans believed to be a weak point. The impact was immediate. Units recoiled, medics scrambled, communication faltered. For a brief moment, the battle seemed to pivot toward collapse. It was then that Allen moved forward to the contested ground, walking the line with a steadiness that contradicted the chaos around him. He did not shout or demand heroics. He simply stood where the fire was heaviest, directing movements with clipped gestures and sparse words. Officers later remarked that his presence changed the tempo of the fight. Men who had been sliding into confusion rediscovered their coherence. The line reformed around the calm of a commander who asked nothing he would not endure himself. With the second counterattack repelled, the Americans resumed their ascent. Step by step, ridge by ridge, the men of the 1st Infantry Division pressed upward until the German defenses cracked. Longstop Hill fell, not in a dramatic rush, but in the slow, grinding inevitability of a force that refused to yield its gains. When the final positions were secured, the air hung heavy with smoke and exhaustion, yet something deeper had settled over the division, the realization that they had fought not as novices but as veterans. For the Wehrmacht, the loss of Longstop carried significance beyond terrain. Their reports noted a troubling development. The Americans no longer fought as an inexperienced army learning its craft. They moved with coordination, absorbed counterattacks with composure, and advanced with a determination that betrayed hardening at every level. In the shadow of Longstop Hill, the Germans recognized a truth that would echo through the remainder of the campaign. This American division no longer resembled the force they had faced at Kasserine. It had been remade in fire, and its transformation was only beginning. Operation Husky opened in the early hours of July 10, 1943, beneath a sky thick with Mediterranean haze. Allied ships stretched across the sea in a formation so vast it seemed to erase the horizon. Yet for Allen, stepping onto Landing Craft Infantry 221, the moment carried a quieter weight. Everything his division had become in North Africa, the discipline, the adaptability, the hardening born of failure and recovery, was now being carried across the water. Sicily would not judge them by promise, but by performance, and he intended to arrive with momentum, not merely as an occupying force, but as a division already moving before the enemy understood the scale of the assault. Once ashore, the 1st Infantry Division advanced inland with a tempo that startled even their own officers. Allen pushed them with the same philosophy he had crafted under the desert sun. Disorientation was a weapon, and speed its sharpest edge. They cut through olive groves and stony ridges with unbroken rhythm, establishing footholds before the Axis defenders fully recognized the direction of attack. Villages fell not through prolonged battle, but through rapid envelopment. Crossroads that German planners had considered defensible collapsed under converging assaults executed faster than their maps allowed. German rearguards, designed to delay rather than hold, found themselves overwhelmed by the sudden flanking movements Allen had refined in Tunisia. Patrols reported American units appearing on their flanks without warning, striking supply convoys, and capturing key terrain before frontline companies had time to reorganize. The effect was not just tactical, it was psychological. The Germans began retreating earlier, abandoning strong positions rather than risk encirclement. Their commanders noted with growing concern that the Americans no longer attacked as novices. They moved like hunters. Among the many officers watching this advance was General Frido von Senger und Etterlin, a disciplined and analytical German commander whose assessments carried considerable weight. In his reports, he recorded a pattern he found deeply troubling: Allen's relentless pressure. The phrase became shorthand among Axis staff officers for an American division that refused to pause long enough for the Germans to regain cohesion. Von Senger observed that whenever the 1st Division appeared stalled, it was merely repositioning. Whenever it seemed to give ground, it was preparing a deeper thrust. To him, Allen's tempo was not recklessness. It was intent expressed through movement. As the Americans pushed farther inland, the speed of the advance began exceeding the projections made by Allied command. Towns slated for capture within days fell in hours. Bridges expected to be destroyed were seized intact. Enemy positions marked as potential centers of resistance dissolved under the pressure of coordinated attacks launched sooner than their defenders anticipated. The Big Red One had begun to measure success not by the terrain it took, but by how swiftly it forced the enemy to abandon control of it. To maintain this pace, Allen made a controversial decision. He moved his headquarters dangerously close to the front. His staff protested the risk, citing the possibility of German counterattacks or airstrikes. Allen dismissed their concerns with the calm certainty of a man who believed proximity gave him understanding no distant post could match. From these advanced positions, he could sense the momentum of the fight, feel the pulse of the division, and issue corrections in real time. His uniform became dusted with the same debris that covered the infantrymen. His maps carried the scent of towns barely secured. This closeness was not symbolic. It was functional, the key to sustaining an advance that depended on constant adaptation. Soldiers later recalled seeing Allen appear unexpectedly at road junctions and captured farms, directing traffic with the same precision he used when shaping doctrine. He was a presence both reassuring and unsettling, calm in the midst of motion, carved into the landscape by the very pace he demanded. The effect on the division was unmistakable. The men pushed harder, aware that their commander was not merely evaluating their performance from afar, but sharing the risks created by speed. The Germans, studying the rapid contraction of their defensive lines, began speaking of a new threat. It was not the American material, nor their air superiority, nor even the growing depth of their logistics. It was the commander who shaped these advantages into pressure. Intercepted communications referred to him first with curiosity, then
Life insurance beneficiary updated. Each confirmation solidified what had begun forming in Rob's mind the night before, a boundary long overdue. When the last page was signed, Grant gathered the documents with a measured exhale. All right, I'll file all of this today. Everything should be legally updated by tomorrow morning. Rob nodded, thank you. Grant hesitated, studying him again. Rob, I know this isn't easy. I've seen families tear each other apart over a lot less. It's not about tearing anything apart, Rob said, rising from the chair. It's about stopping the damage. Grant gave a small nod of understanding. If Daniel contacts me or tries to challenge any of this, I'll let you know. He will, Rob said simply, but I'm done shielding him from his own behavior. He shook Grant's hand, firm and steady, then stepped out into the hallway. The moment the office door closed behind him, the morning seemed different, sharper, quieter. He walked slowly down the steps and onto the sidewalk, feeling the cool air hit his face. Something inside him loosened, like a knot that had been cinched tight for years finally giving way. He hadn't expected it, this strange sense of liberation. He had thought today would feel heavy, maybe even like defeat, but instead there was a calm clarity settling in his chest. Not joy, not triumph. Just peace, the kind that comes when a man finally stops apologizing for his own boundaries. He stood beside his truck for a long moment, staring down the quiet street. The bakery was open now, warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. People walked past without noticing him, just another man in a small town living another ordinary morning. But Rob knew something had shifted, something irreversible. He opened the truck door, stepped inside, and started the engine. As he pulled away from the curb, one thought rose through the quiet like a steady drumbeat. What happened last night wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. And Daniel had no idea what was coming next. The first call came mid-morning, just as Rob stepped out onto the porch with a mug of coffee he didn't really want. The phone vibrated in his pocket, Daniel's name flashing across the screen. Rob stared at it for a long second, the cold air biting against his cheeks. He didn't lift the phone. He didn't even consider answering. He simply turned it face down on the porch railing and let the call ring out into the quiet. The second call came less than a minute later, then a third. By the fifth, the vibration felt like an alarm inside his bones. He let each one ring. Inside, the house felt strangely balanced, still calm, almost peaceful, the kind of calm that had been missing for years, but the phone didn't seem willing to honor that peace. Another vibration buzzed angrily. This time a text appeared on the home screen, bold and sharp. Alyssa, why are you ignoring us? Why would you sabotage our wedding, Lee? Key that. Sabotage. Rob exhaled slowly, the word landing like a sour taste on his tongue. So that was the story now. Not disrespect, not cruelty, not Daniel rewriting his family heritage in front of 100 witnesses. It was Rob, always Rob, being the problem. The phone buzzed again. Alyssa, you embarrassed Daniel. Fix this. He locked the phone without responding. A silence settled again, but it lasted only a few minutes before a car pulled into his driveway. Sam climbed out, shoulders tight, expression guarded. He walked up the steps with a heavy exhale. You okay? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Rob nodded once, but the effort it took made Sam's brow tighten. Sam stepped inside without waiting, pacing the living room like a man trying to burn off anger. He's blowing up my phone too, he said. acting like you're the one who ruined his night. Alyssa's messaging me paragraphs. Rob sat down in his wife's old rocking chair. I expected it. Sam stopped pacing. Dad, what's going on with you? His voice softened. You look closed off. Rob didn't speak right away. He reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out a thick envelope, the documents Grant had finalized. He held it out, and Sam moved closer, confusion deepening. What's this? The will, Rob said simply, updated. Sam opened it, scanning the pages quickly once, then again, slower this time. His eyes widened. Dad, Daniel's not in this at all. No, Rob said, he is. Sam sank onto the edge of the coffee table, papers still in hand. You really did it. His voice was somewhere between disbelief and relief. He was supposed to get the house, all of it. For years that was the plan. Rob looked up at the photo wall. The boys when they were young, smiling without reservation, back before pride and insecurity had twisted the family tree. I kept waiting for him to grow into who he could be, Rob said. But last night proved he has no intention of ever respecting what this family stands for. Sam swallowed, nodding slowly. I'm not going to lie, I'm proud of you. You didn't deserve any of that. Rob gave a faint, tired smile. It wasn't joy, it was recognition. That someone finally saw the toll. Sam set the papers aside and rested a hand briefly on his father's shoulder. No theatrics, just presence. Then the phone buzzed again. This time, the voicemail alert popped up immediately. No text, just a recorded message from a number Rob recognized with growing dread. Alyssa's mother. Rob pressed play. Her voice poured out sharp and sugary. Rob, dear, I think it's adorable that your fragile pride led you to storm the reception like some heartbroken teenager. Truly, very dramatic. But Daniel deserves better than this petty behavior. Fix things, or stay out of the way. The message ended. Sam's jaw tightened. She did not just. She did, Rob said quietly. Sam reached for the phone. Block them, all of them. Rob didn't hesitate this time. One by one, he opened the call logs, Daniel, Alyssa, Marjorie, and muted each number until only silence remained. No triumphant satisfaction. No anger, just a clean break. When he finally set the phone down, he felt something inside him settle. Not peace exactly, but alignment. The kind that came when a man finally recognized who he could no longer protect. Sam sat beside him, hands clasped. They're not done, he said. People like that, they always push harder when they realize they're losing control. Rob nodded, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. He knew Sam was right. The Carters didn't retreat. They reloaded. Daniel, under their influence, would escalate. He would panic once he realized the financial consequences of what he'd thrown away. Rob wasn't afraid of that. Not anymore. As the house fell quiet again, the blocked calls faded into the distance, but Rob knew deep down the storm hadn't passed. It was only circling. And soon it would land right at his door. Rob had just sat down with a mug of reheated coffee when the sound of tires crunching over gravel snapped the quiet in half. He looked out the window, expecting Sam, maybe coming by early, maybe checking in. Instead, a sleek silver SUV pulled into the driveway, the kind of car that looked out of place next to Rob's weathered truck and the modest home he'd built his life inside. A moment later, Daniel stepped out. Alyssa followed, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, striding with a confidence that felt rehearsed. Rob's stomach tightened. He knew this confrontation would come, but not this soon, not this boldly. Before he could open the door, Alyssa was already knocking, sharp, rapid, entitled. Rob pulled the door open slowly. Well, she said brightly, we're here. Daniel didn't meet Rob's eyes. He had that stiff posture again, the one he wore when Alyssa was about to speak for both of them. Rob stepped aside just enough to block the doorway. For what? Alyssa waved her hand dismissively. We're moving in temporarily. Just until we buy something better. The wedding wiped us out for the moment, and Daniel needs stability for his new image. Rob blinked, unsure whether to laugh or close the door in her face. Moving in. Yes, she said, as if explaining something obvious to a confused toddler. You have the space, and honestly, it's the least you can do after what you pulled at the reception. Daniel cleared his throat. We didn't want it to be awkward, Dad. We're just trying to move forward. Rob took a slow breath. You can't move in. Alyssa gave a single incredulous laugh. Excuse me. This house, Rob said, keeping his voice even, is legally Sam's inheritance now. The words hung in the air like a dropped match. Daniel blinked hard. Alyssa's mouth fell open before twisting into something sharp. What are you talking about? I updated my will yesterday, Rob said. Everything goes to Sam. For a heartbeat, there was absolute stillness. Then Alyssa stepped forward, fury snapping off her like sparks. You are unbelievable, she spat. You're punishing Daniel because you can't handle losing control of him. This is pathetic, Rob, jealous and pathetic. Daniel's face twisted, not with sadness but with anger, anger that came from embarrassment, from loss of power, from realizing the consequences of his own words. You're ruining my new family image, he said. Do you have any idea how this looks? I just got married and now you're cutting me off. People are going to think that I finally defended myself, Rob interrupted quietly. Daniel's mouth snapped shut. Alyssa stepped closer, pointing a manicured finger at Rob. You're doing this because I come from money, because you feel threatened. You want Daniel under your thumb forever, just like some small-town tyrant. Rob didn't move. You insulted our name, you mocked this home, and now you want to live in it. We're your family, Daniel said suddenly, as if remembering the word might persuade him. You forgot that first, Rob replied. Alyssa scoffed loudly. This is unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. She turned to Daniel, shaking her head. Your father is sabotaging us. He wants to watch us fail. Rob held her gaze steadily. No, I just stopped funding your comfort. Before Alyssa could unleash whatever venom was next, another car turned sharply into the driveway. Sam's. He stepped out quickly, reading the tension instantly. His eyes moved from Rob to Daniel to Alyssa, narrowing in a way that suggested he'd been preparing for this moment. What's going on? Sam asked, voice cold. Alyssa spun toward him. Your father is throwing us out before we even get inside. He changed the will behind Daniel's back. Can you believe that? Sam didn't even blink. Yes, he said, I can. Daniel bristled. Sam, stay out of this. No, Sam replied, stepping closer, jaw clenched. You don't get to talk to him like this. Not here, not on his property. It's supposed to be our property, Alyssa shouted. He told us so for years. Sam laughed once, short and humorless. And you threw that away the moment you decided our name wasn't good enough for you. Daniel's face flushed a deep red. Sam, back off. Sam took another step, voice low and measured. You need to leave, both of you. Alyssa looked ready to explode. We're not leaving, this is. You are, Sam said, now. There was something in his tone, a controlled promise of escalation, that finally cut through Alyssa's rage. She glanced at Daniel, waiting for him to stand up to his brother. Daniel didn't. Alyssa's expression twisted into disgust. Fine, but this isn't over. We'll sue. We'll challenge everything. You can't just cut Daniel out because your ego is fragile. Rob didn't flinch. Do what you need to do. Alyssa stormed toward the SUV, muttering curses under her breath. Daniel followed, pausing once as if he might say something, but whatever words he searched for never came. He got in the car quietly. The SUV peeled out of the driveway, gravel spitting behind it. Silence fell again. Sam turned to Rob. You okay? Rob nodded once, but something in his eyes had shifted, hardened, settled. Yeah, he said quietly, I am now. But as he looked at the road where the SUV disappeared, he knew they wouldn't let this go. And the next attempt would be worse. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, hand-delivered in a crisp white envelope that looked far too elegant for the venom inside it. Rob found it on his porch beside the mailbox, the embossed return address reading Carter and Doyle Legal Associates, Alyssa's family firm. He didn't need to open it to know what it contained, but he did anyway, unfolding the paper with the deliberate calm of a man who refused to be rattled anymore. The letter was written in polished legal language, but the message was unmistakable. Reinstate Daniel's rightful inheritance. Failure to comply may result in formal legal action. Rob read it twice, then set it on the table. Not one word about reconciliatio. And not one acknowledgement of the behavior that had led to this. Just entitlement, elevated by letterhead. He called Grant immediately and drove to his office. The attorney skimmed the document once before letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. "This is pathetic," Grant said. "They have no claim. You're alive, competent, and well within your rights to change your will. This," he tapped the letter with a pen, "this is noise." Rob nodded, though part of him stung at how predictable it had been. "I figured as much." Grant leaned back in his chair. "They're trying to intimidate you. It won't hold up in court. If they push, let them waste their money. You're protected." Rob felt something inside him settle, a small but solid reassurance. But Grant wasn't finished. "And Rob, this won't be their last attempt. When entitled people lose access to what they assumed was theirs, they get desperate." Rob knew that too well. By the time he left the office, the storm had already begun elsewhere. As he sat in his truck, his phone vibrated with a new notification, one he almost didn't check. He should have ignored it, but he opened it anyway. Daniel Hale has posted a new update. The post was public, bold, dripping with performative righteousness. "Some people never change. Escaping a toxic parent is harder than it looks, but I'm finally breaking free. I won't let anyone hold me back from becoming who I'm meant to be." Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments offering sympathy, strangers consoling him, friends validating him, a few subtle jabs at older generations who shame success. Rob stared at the screen a long time, a cold ache forming beneath his ribs. He didn't comment, didn't defend himself, didn't reveal the truth. He simply locked the phone and drove home slowly, each mile heavier than the last. By afternoon, the small-town gossip circuit had spun into motion. People whispered at the diner, at the hardware store, at the gas station, some sympathetic, some curious, some quietly judgmental. The kind of gossip that seeped into every corner of a community, even the ones that pretended to be above such things. Around 4, Nora from next door knocked on Rob's door. She held a plate of muffins in one hand and concern in her eyes. "I saw what Daniel posted," she said softly as Rob let her in. "I know you, Rob. You're not the man he's describing." She hesitated, then squeezed his arm. "Don't let them rewrite your story." Rob offered a tired, grateful smile. The reassurance meant more than he wanted to admit. But the day wasn't done. That evening, Sam stormed into the living room, his jaw tight. "I'm done being quiet," he said, throwing his phone onto the coffee table. "He's dragging you through the mud. Dad, I'm not letting him get away with this." Before Rob could respond, Sam had already posted a public reply to Daniel's accusations, measured but firm. "Stop harassing our father. Stop lying. You know exactly why he made the decisions he did." And just like that, the quiet family fracture became a public rupture. Comments poured in, some defending Sam, others attacking him, still others fueling the drama with speculation. The divide sharpened, clean and ugly. Rob closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the exhaustion seep into his bones. This was never what he wanted: public battles, online insults, family members weaponizing strangers' opinions. He had hoped the truth would reveal itself naturally, without escalation. But hope, he realized, had become a luxury he could no longer afford. He turned to Sam. "Thank you," he said quietly, "but be careful, they're not done." "I don't care," Sam snapped. "They can come at me all they want, but they're not tearing you down." Rob appreciated the loyalty, but he knew where this road led. Once pride and fear mixed with public humiliation, retaliation became inevitable. Later, when the house finally fell silent again, Rob sat alone at the kitchen table, the letter from Alyssa's mother lying beside him like a threat waiting to ignite. He traced a fingertip along its edge, steady and calm. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't shaken. He was preparing. Because people like the Carters didn't back down. People like Daniel didn't accept consequences. People who built their identities on appearances always escalated when those appearances cracked. And Rob could feel it in the air. The next wave was coming. But this time, he wouldn't be caught defenseless. He was ready for whatever surfaced next. The first rumor drifted into Rob's world over a cup of coffee at the local diner. 2 tables behind him, a pair of older women murmured in low voices. Gossip carried on the kind of whispers people think are private but never really are. "Carter Investments, slowing down, I heard. Her brother's firm pulled out of a project. And Alyssa, still spending like nothing's wrong." Rob didn't turn around. He didn't need to. The pieces slid together quietly, forming a picture he wished he didn't recognize. Trouble in the sea. Arter family wasn't just a financial inconvenience. It was a threat to the image Alyssa built her life around. And people in crisis rarely softened. They grasped. They clawed. They reached for whatever kept them elevated. By that afternoon, the storm arrived at Rob's doorstep. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. Daniel. He let it ring. A second call came, then a third, then a text, short and painfully transparent. "Dad, we need to talk. It's important." Not "I'm sorry." Not "I miss you." Not "I was wrong." Just "need." Rob didn't reply. Minutes later, another text appeared. "Please, just 5 minutes." Still, he let the silence speak for him. But desperation had a way of finding cracks, and soon after, another message lit up the screen, this one from Alyssa. "You owe us for raising Daniel's status. Don't pretend you don't." Followed by, "He deserves stability. You're being selfish." Rob sat down heavily, the phone glowing in his palm. "Owe us." The words pulsed with entitlement so pure it almost stunned him. Raising Daniel's status, as if love, sacrifice, and years of single fatherhood were nothing but stepping stones for someone else's ambition. He set the phone face down, refusing to let her voice echo any further in his home. That evening, Sam showed up without warning. His footsteps were quick, angry. "He called me 4 times today," Sam said, pushing through the door. "Do you know what he wants?" Rob didn't answer. "He wants money," Sam continued, "or access to it. He won't admit it, but you can hear it in the way he circles around the subject." Rob's jaw tightened. "I'm not meeting with him." "I know,"